Okay, everybody, welcome to the Dakota Garden Expo. And next presentation, we'll discuss prairie-inspired garden strategies. Our speaker is Amy Duchsherer. Amy's a North Dakota native and a passionate nature enthusiast. She has deep appreciation for the prairie landscapes of the Great Plains. And as a master gardener intern, Amy hopes to inspire us to create welcoming spaces for nature in our yards through sustainable gardening practices and native plants. Let's welcome Amy to the expo.
Welcome everybody, thanks for coming to my talk. A little bit about myself. This is kind of a goofy picture, but I think it shows some enthusiasm. I grew up south of Fargo in the Sandhills area, so growing up I kind of took for granted our prairie landscapes, and when you're just used to seeing something, you don't realize the real beauty of what we have. Growing up, I saw lots of different, I grew up on a farm, so lots of wildlife and different plants, and as I grew older, I kind of lost my appreciation for those things or my curiosity. I think school sometimes strips this out of us, right? We sit still and we do the things. But as I got older, I really fell in love with birds first, was kind of my first foray back into nature. It started to get me really curious about what's happening and noticing the world around me. This is me at Kearney, Nebraska a few weeks ago. I went down for the sandhill crane migration, and there was 800,000 sandhill cranes on an 80-mile stretch of the river. So you go into a blind, and it's dark and it's quiet, except for the birds are really noisy on the river. And it's just I don't know, it's almost a spiritual experience, they lift off from the river, and it's just the most amazing thing. But this started me, this journey back into birds, and noticing all of the things got me interested in the world around me and thinking about our environment. And then I started to notice the bumblebees in my yard, and they're just the best thing ever, bumbling around. One year they built a nest in my siding, and they were luckily docile and not a problem, and we were able to wait until the spring and close up the hole and whatever. So I started to really think about how do I start to bring more nature back into my life, and how it's a little bit selfish. I wanted to lure more birds into my yard is kind of where this project started. I'm very much an amateur still. I just finished my master gardening coursework, so now I'm what they call a master gardener intern, but I am passionate about learning new things and sharing new things with people. So if nothing else, I hope I can share some of my passion and excitement for what we can do to kind of reestablish landscapes in North Dakota. So first we'll start off with some sustainable gardening basics. This picture I love so much. This is in my yard. Mostly I spend my summers, professionally I'm a professor down at University of Marion, the communication department, so that's my real area of expertise is communication. But most of the summer I wander around my yard and take pictures of bees on my flowers and send them to Karen and my different friends. But this bumblebee here, she has you can see she has so much pollen on her face, and she was just digging in this flower, and I watched her for a really long time. And then I emailed our entomologist on campus, Jack Boyle, and I was like, look at this bumblebee, isn't she great? And then I noticed there's this little green beetle. I have no idea what that is, but you start to see, when you really start to slow down and look, you start to notice all of the beauty that we have, even in small things like sunflowers that I think, I often take those for granted too, because you just see them in the fields and you don't really think about the beauty that's there as well. So what does sustainable gardening do? Our goal is to minimize harm to the environment, so less pesticide inputs and different things like that if we're able to. Increasing harmony with our local ecosystem, so thinking about how things work together. I don't think about necessarily these little beetles that are here, right? But we want to work in harmony with those beetles and give them a place to be if we can. Using our resources wisely. The last couple of years in North Dakota, we've had drought conditions. So thinking about I watch my neighbor across the yard, across the road, and he has a beautiful green landscape. Jenna can attest to this because she lives near me. He is in his yard tirelessly mowing and watering and fidgeting around, right? And I just think about turf grass recently has become like an enemy to me. I'm like, think of all the water that we waste on turf grass, right? But it definitely has its place, right? It's just not my personal preference. But we want to use our resources wisely, and that's something that sustainable gardening can do for us. And then supporting biodiversity of our native wildlife. So I have this little phrase on the bottom that I thought kind of wraps this up really nicely. Sustainable gardening is not just about planting beautiful flowers, but that could be part of it, right? It's about creating life-rich landscapes that are resilient and regenerative, right? So that's what hopefully I'll inspire today. I started reading a lot, maybe the end of last summer. I started to get really interested in sustainable gardening and thinking about how can we do this better. I am admittedly a pretty lazy gardener. Like, I just kind of like to put things out there and let them do their own thing. In 2023, 2023, I planted a pollinator garden. That's a little bit of a disaster. It is. It's a weedy mess. I didn't prep it well. So I think, like, I'm speaking from a place of failure, and I'm hoping that this is the first year that I feel confident. Like, I have a plan that I can actually fix this thing and make it like a real, like, little micro. I've rebranded it to a micro prairie because that's kind of the vibes it has more than a pollinator garden, I think. But this book here, I read this winter, and it really started to change my perspective on how things went. So the crash course in this, or what I took away from it at least, so Douglas Tallamy talks about this idea of homegrown national parks. And he starts the book by describing how our different animals are like living in forests, let's say. And then if we take away these like connections and networks to get to different forests, they're stuck in this single forest, and we like don't have enough diversity to support the population, and they start to die, right? So the resources aren't there. But this idea that like, if I plant a couple of native plants, and then the guy across the street is planting a couple of native plants, and then a couple blocks down, somebody else has it, we start to build these like networks and interconnected pathways that animals can start to move through our spaces, right? So it doesn't take, like, I don't have to have acres and acres of land to plant, right? Even just small patches of native flowers can help build these ecosystems up in our local communities. So why is this important? I don't know if he only talked about birds, but it was the part that I took away because I was excited about the birds. Birds are like a great predictor of healthy ecosystems, and his basic premise is that plants host different insects. Insects are food for birds. He talks a lot about caterpillars and pollinators. Like, they're important because they become butterflies, but they're also important because caterpillars are like soft food sacks for baby birds to eat. So if we can support these like caterpillars, we get more birds, we build healthy ecosystems, basically. So this book, if you're interested, I read it in like 2 days. I just like devoured it over Christmas break. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, I can't recommend this book enough. He has two other books that I haven't read yet, but I really enjoyed it. So this started me thinking about, how can we do things differently? Part of this too is that our native plants have these awesome, huge root systems that like aerate our soil and prevent erosion and make them super drought tolerant, right? I didn't touch my pollinator garden. Like, I don't ever water it, and it's like thriving, and my yard is dead because I don't water a drop on it, right? Unless my son is like playing with the hose. So we have, dead turf, and then these native plants that are like flourishing and neglected, right? So even looking at like Kentucky bluegrass, right? What we have for most of our lawns, just a couple of inches deep, versus like lead plant and goldenrod, which have these roots that go, 8-9 feet down. We can definitely see how they're going to be a lot more resistant to like drought. They are made for the ecosystem that they've been like bred and raised in, right? So why does any of this matter? Especially in North Dakota, right? Why do we care about these little prairie ecosystems or these native ecosystems that can help develop wildlife? They also are built for these sort of things. So we have extreme climate in North Dakota, right? We have drought, and we have wet years, and we have hot and cold, right? So we have these like extreme climate swings that exist, and our plants are built for that if they're native to the area. So they're going to be able to sustain themselves a lot easier. Water conservation, I talked about that with the soil, or with the roots. Soil health is going to improve because of the aeration. We have less We have less erosion. Native plants are also, like our grasses especially, are awesome carbon sinks. They like open up at certain times of the day and then close to like sequester carbon, and it goes so deep into the ground. Like trees are great carbon sinks, but if there's a fire, that carbon is released back up in a way that grasses don't. So grasses are an awesome carbon sink as well. They support our wildlife, which I've talked about. And my favorite thing, even though all of these are very good things, is we get these beautiful landscapes with less work, right? So I do get like summers off, but I also don't want to spend my entire summer like feeling like I'm a slave to my lawnmower or like weeding the like flowers in my garden, right? So beauty with less work, I think, is a positive thing as well. All right, so I'm not going to focus entirely on prairie plants. I will talk about other sustainable things, but I think it's hard to talk about building prairie landscapes without introducing you to some of the prairie plants. It was hard for me to pick which ones I wanted to talk about because I apparently love them all. As I was practicing this, I'm like, one of my favorites. I'm like, I can't say they're all my favorite, but apparently they are. Pasque-flower, this is admittedly, spring bloomers are pretty weak in my garden. This is an area that I said, I need to work on this year, is find some more spring bloomers, plant them in the fall and get them ready to come out in the spring. Pasque-flower is about, I forget that I'm mic, so this is loud. About 9 to 12 inches high. It's one of the earliest bloomers, and it's gonna thrive in really dry, open areas. So this is a great addition if you want some early flowers in your garden that can start feeding pollinators really quick.
Do you get those from seeds, or where would you get flowers to start from?
So you can do native plants a couple of different ways. Some are notoriously hard to start from seed, like wild indigo, really difficult to start from seed. I've tried, not that it can't be done. You can also buy like cell packs from different nurseries and stuff, so it kind of depends on like what you want to do with it. I haven't personally had any experience with pasque-flower, so I don't have like a great recommendation on if a plant is easier than a...
If you know where there's something growing naturally, do they transplant?
Some will transplant well, but not all. So like wild bergamot I have in my garden, and the roots are kind of like floppy, and they don't transplant well. But something like a coneflower, right, transplants really nicely. Or like prickly pear, you could probably transplant pretty easily. So it depends on the plant. Yeah, good question. Prairie smoke, I have been unsuccessful in starting this in my garden as well. I think it's just so beautiful and like adds kind of like a wild interest to your garden. So this is something that I'm constantly chasing, and I will get to grow at some point in my yard. Golden Alexander, this is also really nice for early pollinators. This is gonna be a little bit taller, 1 to 3 feet tall, so it can add a little bit more height in your garden and that really nice yellow pop of color. And then the last spring bloomer I'll talk about just real quickly is a wild lupine. This is kind of variable in height, 8 to 24 inches about, but also you wanna make sure when you're choosing native plants that we're not choosing accidentally invasive plants. So lupine's a great example of this. There's a lupine in the west that grows in like California and Utah and Nevada that has now become invasive in Maine. So you wanna make sure that if you're getting the right variety for our area and that we're not introducing accidentally invasive species. All right, summer bloomers. Butterfly weed, I've never actually seen a butterfly on my butterfly weed. The bees love my butterfly weed. It has a great like orange color to it, as you can see in the picture. I've noticed that my personal pollinator garden is mostly like purple and yellow. There's not a lot of diversity. I think it's to have to do how pollinators like see. They don't see like reds a lot. The bees don't, at least. The reds are more like hummingbirds will be attracted and things like that. Purple coneflower echinacea, this one's from my yard. You can see this honeybee is like really happy there. One thing that I will note is that different cultivars and varieties, you want to be kind of careful if they're changing the color a lot, or like there's a really pretty double coneflower that's like all fluffy petals, but the bees don't really love those because they can't get into the pollen and the stuff that they need. Not that those things are bad to have, that you should like avoid them, but if you want something for your pollinators, thinking about if you have a variety that they're going to like, and a little bit of searching can help you kind of choose the right plants that are going to be useful. This is wild bergamot. I have a big patch of this. This is mine. You can see it has, I don't know, like a powdery mildew or something on it, so I think I need to thin it out probably. But the bumblebees love this so much. I've also got a lot of carpenter bees, the little black ones. They'll like nest under the leaves, so it's kind of fun to like peek around in my pollinator garden. Another reason that it's like in such bad shape is that at some point I like say that it just becomes the bees. Like I don't want to be in there because it's so full of life. We have great black wasps. If you've ever seen them, they're like massive and black and beautiful. And they're very like docile, but you don't want to mess with their home. So I'm like, if I'm tromping around in my garden and like messing things up, I don't want to accidentally come upon this wasp nest, right? So at some point it just becomes the bees and I leave it be for the summer as much as I can. But wild bergamot, this smells great. It has really interesting seed heads, so like in the winter, it adds a lot of visual interest to my garden too. I actually still have it up, I haven't cut it down yet. Wild indigo, this one is the one that I was talking about. It's really hard to grow from seed. It has a hard seed coating, so you would need to like scarify it. We tried like soaking our seeds, and then you have to stratify them, so they have to be cold for a certain amount of time. And it's just like a lot of extra work. If you are interested in this, I would say find somebody who had it. So I had a generous neighbor who saw me trying to make my pollinator garden and seeing me toil and struggle along with my garden. And she brought me a whole bunch of awesome plants, and this was one of them. And you can see like it comes yellow, or it blooms yellow, but then it turns into this really beautiful like purple color, and then it sets these awesome seed heads that like, I don't know, they're really beautiful all winter long, and then they're kind of fun too because you can shake them like a little rattle and hear the seeds in there. So like, they're just kind of this is a really awesome plant too.
If you do find somebody, I've got the blue one though.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants them, you can come because they're seeding all over the place.
Oh, hey.
But come with a shovel that's so deep. I mean, we absolutely tried to move some this fall, and we ended up breaking it off, but I think we were 3 feet down deep before we even broke it.
Yeah, their roots are like amazing, go so deep. And some of these are like nitrogen fixing plants as well, so they can help like amend our soils too. So that's good intel there. But this is a beautiful plant. But this is one, I wouldn't start from seed. It's just probably not worth the effort unless you're very tenacious. All right. Another summer bloomer, yarrow. This is a little bit more aggressive of a plant, so if you don't mind something that spreads, it hasn't like taken over my garden, but it is like blooming next to the trees in the boulevard, and I just let it go. I'm like, this is awesome. Look at how natural my yard is becoming. One year I like mowed around a black-eyed Susan for like weeks, just left it go right in the middle of my yard. But yarrow is awesome. It has these little ferny leaves, so even the foliage is really beautiful. You can get them in different mixes. We have like a Colorado mix, so we have like pinks and yellows, and then it's got like a darker purple color. A lot of times you'll see white like natively in North Dakota. So this one's great, and it's like 1 to 2 feet, but it also kind of lays down. So if you want like a good ground cover, it seems to, at least in my garden, be a decent ground cover. Some people will mix this into like bee lawns as well. So you can like mow it and do all sorts of things, abuse it, and it's a happy plant. Moving on to our fall bloomers, so this will be like September and beyond, right? So aromatic asters, we don't have any of these in our garden, but I'm hoping to add them once I fix it. These are one of the latest blooming plants, so they add good nutrition for our pollinators. Showy goldenrod, we have a little bit of this in our garden. Last year was the first year that it bloomed, and all year long I kept going like, what is this plant? I don't know what this plant is. Will this plant ever bloom? But it didn't look like weedy. You can, sometimes you get like an intuition, like this is a weed or this is something I want. And it bloomed like in October. It bloomed so late. It was the last thing like blooming anywhere, and the bees were all over it. They were super happy. It also gets a decent height. It's like about probably 3 feet tall or so it's a pretty good, nice tall plant too. Blue vervain, I don't have this. Honestly, when I was Googling is when I learned that it existed. I don't know, I'll just be honest with you. Like I said, I'm kind of an amateur still, so. But I just think like these like heads where the blooms are coming are really like just interesting in and of themselves, right? It almost looks like a grass, and then like poof, all of a sudden it's this great purple color, and it's going to bloom like in that late fall, and then it said it was about 2 to 5 feet tall. So if you need like a nice tall plant, that would be a great addition too. And then Joe Pieweed, Jenna was telling, Karen, my friend Jenna was telling about her mom's garden. She has this awesome patch of Joe Pieweed, and it's just like really beautiful, and it's so tall, and the bees love it. We have not been successful. I think it's probably too dry where we're planting it. It likes wet soil, correct? Yes. I think it's just probably too dry where I'm trying to put it, so I need to maybe find a different home for it. It also likes sun, so if you have a shady area, there's a sweet Joe Pieweed that's a little bit better in shade. And then if we're planting a prairie, right, prairies also have tons of grasses. So I've pulled some grasses that I think are attractive and can add a little bit of interest to our prairies if we're thinking about that. Little blue stem, 1 to 3 feet tall. Prairie drop seed gets these great little seed pods that come up and bloom. But I think it's just like, even just foliage-wise, how it drapes over is really attractive and could be kind of a statement piece. About 2 to 4 feet tall for prairie drop seed. Big blue stem, this is a big boy, it's 5 to 8 feet tall. So if you're looking for like something really big for your yard and like a nice statement in the back, big blue stem's an awesome addition. Switchgrass, this is what I grew up with over by Fargo, right? And it's just everywhere. And then these really pretty like breezy heads of seeds. And then June grass, we did plant some of this in our garden. We also have some blue stem. The grasses didn't come, but we also had a lot of quackgrass, so I'll talk about that later. The pollinator garden is really a failure of sorts, and it's getting better every year. But I think I've learned so much by my failure, and you have so much to learn from my failure that you don't have to be me, right? But June grass, I just think these wispy little heads are like the prettiest little thing, right? They're just so dainty and cute and can add a lot of interest to our gardens. So adding in some grasses can give us that kind of prairie vibe that we're looking for. All right, so how do we know what to pick, right? So many plants, I didn't even like scratch the surface of possible prairie plants. As I was practicing, I was like, oh, I didn't talk about purple prairie clover, right? We have that in our garden and I just love it. It gets these little seeds and it's just so cute. Plant communities are an assemblage of plants that coexist in a similar environment. So like if you're planting a house plant, you're not going to put like a monstera plant in with a cactus, right? Because when we're watering our monstera to keep it alive, we're going to kill the cactus, okay? So we want to think about the same thing in the plants that we're building these communities with. Different communities are defined by their structure, form, and species composition. Plant communities are both spatially and temporally dynamic. So thinking about, I talked about the different height of those different plants. We don't want just like a 2-foot garden. Everything's going to hide. We won't be able to see it, right? So we want some height and some lower. We want some things that are taking up a smaller amount of space and some things that are bigger, right? So spatially, but also that temporally dynamic, things that are blooming all throughout the year, right? And if we want like constant color, we could even add in annuals and things like that to make it attractive in between the spaces when our natives are blooming. All right, so things that we want to consider is our bloom sequence, right? So are they blooming in the spring, the fall, the summer? When are things blooming? And having a little bit of stuff bloom all of the time. Grouping by moisture, so we don't want to, like I said, put things that like wet conditions in with things that like dry conditions. Thinking about our visual interest, right? So what do things, as I was mentioning, I kind of mentioned like, oh, this color is really interesting in this one. But if you have all sorts of interesting color all at once, it can be kind of a mess, right? So thinking about like that texture, like, oh, I want that fluffy grass, or purple prairie clover is kind of fluffy too, that's what I love about it. Or like that winter beauty as well. My husband was like, he's a little more resistant to my wild, like free-form gardening situation. He's like, can we just cut down some things in the pollinator garden? I'm like, no, because my birds are going to eat the seeds. Like I had plans for this garden. But my wild bergamot gets these awesome seed heads, and then we have some like onion, like wild onion kind of stuff, nodding onion and stuff. And they get these great seed heads too. But then the magic of winter is that the frost comes and it like clings onto these things and like amplifies the texture, right? So in some spaces, like, I mean, it's a little weedy and messy looking, but also like it has these awesome like aspects that show up in the winter, where everyone else's lawn is just flat and boring and snow, right? So thinking about that visual beauty in the winter is also important. So we might think about combining some earlier things like wild indigo that's going to flower early, and then maybe we have some mid-summer things like yarrow, and then we have some late summer things like those golden rods, right, to add, and those would be different heights and volumes. Adding in those grasses would also help. So that's a design thing. So I've shared lots of failures that I had, but I want to show you that I didn't go into this just like with no idea of what I was doing with my pollinator garden. I made a spreadsheet and I understood some of these things when I started, right? You can see that I had the plant name and then the height of each plant, and then I had sorted them by height to kind of figure out like where they might go in the garden. And then I had the colors that I knew like, oh, these are a lot of yellow things together. Maybe I want to have like some yellow and pink together. And then the bloom range, so I knew like when things would be blooming. And I made a wish list of plants and kind of thought through the things. We went wrong probably, and I didn't prepare the space very well, but that's where I'm gonna fix it this year, is I'm gonna solarize portions of it. Big things are coming to my house. All right, so some design tips. Things that we can do. We don't want it to look like a complete mess and a disaster, that it just like accidentally happened, right? Some things that are gonna help us make our prairie look intentional is mass plantings. So having like at least groups of 3 together, right? And maybe like larger swaths together, or they call them drifts, where you have like a couple of plants and then it kind of moves across your landscape. That's going to make it look intentional. Layering, so thinking about, you know, how prairies are built, there's no like random dirt patches out in the prairie, right? If you go hiking out on a prairie, it's all, you know, like plants together that are covered. So thinking about what's a good ground cover, what can we have for like some middle space, and then what gives me a little bit of height and interest, so like that structural piece of our gardens. Seasonal interest, so blooming constantly, thinking about winter, what does this look like? And then thinking about blending structure with some wild beauty, we can add in things like statues or benches or paths or different things like that that can show like this is an intentional space that I'm using for a specific purpose, like a bird feeder or a bird house or a bee house or a like a bird, what is it called? The water thing that the birds drink out of. A bird bath, right? So we could have all sorts of things added that show some like structure and interest to the space and help add in some beauty. So some sources. We had a question, where do I find native plants, or how do I know what to do? Native Plant Finder from the National Wildlife Foundation or Federation has this awesome tool that you type in your zip code. It tells you all of the native plants in your area, and then it tells you how many different insects it hosts. So like goldenrod hosts like 55 species of insects, right? Oak trees, 100 plus. So you can find, if you're really interested in building that ecosystem, like, and you don't have a lot of space, or you're not sure where to start, like starting with some goldenrod is gonna be a great place to start for our area in Bismarck, right? But if you're from Eastern North Dakota, you can type in your zip code, see where you're at, and kind of build from there. This BONAP, BONAP.net, is a database based on scientists that show where different natives are planted by county. So there's a whole map that you can go and access and look at. And then native plant nurseries are also really awesome. So when I started, I didn't know about these tools, but I did know that Prairie Moon Nursery existed, and I just kind of trusted, like, if it's a Minnesota native and they're growing it there, that's going to be a pretty good place to start, right? So then from there, I would kind of look, and they have more like forest areas and stuff like that. So not every plant worked for me, but I was able to have a really good starting point and figure out like, where do I go from there, kind of thing. I did a little Googling last night to find like, oh, what are some good nurseries? And I found this old Reddit forum that has a wiki that has like native plant nurseries for everywhere in the world, like Australia or wherever. So there's tons, and then it's broken down by state. So North Dakota, I didn't notice any, but Minnesota had several that we could choose from. So I wanted to show you an example of what this native plant finder looks like. So you type in your zip code, and then it gives you the different plants, and then it tells you how many species. So like strawberry, 47, sunflower, 45. So these are like great places to start. And then there's a separate one for trees. I don't have room for trees, so I didn't really worry about that. But if you have like space to plant a tree, you might think about like, what kind of tree do I want to go plant? So this native plant finder is super helpful. But then here's where it gets really cool. Buckle up, everyone. When you click into the plant, it tells you about all of these different species of insects that it supports, right? But then it also shows you like, hey, this little guy here, whatever he is, only has one plant that it can feed on and live with, and it's showing, or it's goldenrod. So like goldenrod is super important to some of these specialist insects that can only live based on that plant, right? But like this one over here has 11. So you can learn more about the species, and there's tons of information on this database. So this is a really cool one that you could spend some time looking at if you're looking for plants. All right, so that's the plant bit of this. That was a lot, but I think it's important, and it's kind of like, for me, the most exciting bit of what I got to talk about, so I was excited about that. Other sustainable practices. Composting. Composting is something that I've done once successfully. I have a tumbler, and I've had it for 6 or 7 years, and I've made 1 round of compost, but now I know more about composting, and I'm gonna make some this summer. So really good things are coming to my house. What are the benefits of compost? The reason that I got into it was I started to think about all of these like the plant waste, right? Like I'm cutting up my carrots for soup or whatever, and then I'm throwing everything in the garbage, and like this is stuff that could be used for something else, right? Like I just had this feeling, I'm like, I'm going to start composting, and I bought a little tumbler and like read, I don't know, half a Wikipedia article probably, and then just went for it. And I was successful the first time and then never again. So I don't know what happened in the meantime. I think my ratios got off, but we'll talk about that in a second. It increases our organic content in our soil, so that also improves our soil texture, drainage, and fertility. It's going to enhance plants' resistance to pest diseases and weather extremes because it has different anti-pathogenic microbes in the soil, so it's going to help suppress some of those things. So compost is really good for our soil. Lots of different methods that we can use. I'm not going to dive in too deep, but I just wanted to highlight that this exists, right? So like I said, I have a little tumbler. It's not going to make me a lot of compost, but it's a good place to start, I think, if you're just like compost curious, right? Like, oh, what is this compost? What does this look like, right? You can make bins or boxes. Karen has a compost pile, right? Where you like...
It's like 3 by 3 by 3.
A 3 by 3 by 3 box, and then they turn it and do all the composty things. Yeah, so that's a good option too if you have more space in your backyard and like a good spot to put it. You can do pit composting or dig a hole. So basically like dig your hole, put your stuff in, and then bury it and leave it. Sheet or lasagna composting. So like lasagna composting is you use newspapers. So you lay down like a mixture of green and brown matter, and I'll talk about that in a second, and then a layer of newspaper, and you layer them on top of each other and then kind of leave it. It's good for like raised garden beds and that sort of thing if you can be patient to plant in those. So composting is really great. How do you do it? We have a mixture of green materials, which are nitrogen-rich materials, okay? And then we have our brown materials, so things like dry leaves, newspapers, 75%, and this is like by volume basically, right? So if you're approximating like this is how much I need, that's going to help you. This is where I think I went wrong. I got too much of one, probably brown material, not enough green material, and then it kind of went bad from there. So composting, things to avoid though. We don't want any meat or dairy or oils, no human or pet waste. Weeds with seeds or that spread through rhizomes, unless you have like a super hot compost pile, it's not going to kill that. So most home composting isn't going to be able to kill off the weeds, and you're just going to like make more weeds in your compost. And then like chemically treated plants, we don't want to add that back, especially if you're using it in your garden where you're going to eat the food. Other sustainable practices you could do are like rainwater harvesting. This is one thing that I got interested in from like a lady on Instagram basically. But like a single 1,000 square foot roof with an inch of rain could harvest 620 gallons of rainwater. So like the possibilities of rainwater harvesting, she actually makes like these cisterns underground, so it comes off your roof and like goes down into a system. If you want to invest a lot of money in something like that, it makes sense. She's in Utah, right? Like it really makes sense down there. But even for us, like rain barrels or a rain garden where you're digging a depression down would be a good way to do that. And then a little bit about wildlife-friendly practices. So we want a little bit less fall cleanup. Leaving our seed heads on for our birds and things that can eat those. Keep our dead stems standing because our pollinator friends like to lay their eggs in there, so leaving them to grow over the winter. Leave the leaves. I know if you don't want them like on your lawn, you could even just sweep them up into a pile off into the corner, right? I leave all my leaves and they're like magically gone now. So wait to cut back your perennials, and then delaying your spring cleanup. So waiting until your temperatures are consistently 50 degrees. Cut back your old stems gradually. I have mine cut from my pollinator garden, and then I've just laid them kind of in a corner to, like, in case there's anybody still waking up in there. A bonus tip is that you could designate a messy zone where you're just like, whatever happens, happens over here, and I don't need to worry about it. One of the things a lot of times that happens is we get like that social pressure, right? About like, the guy across the street with the immaculate lawn can see the disaster that's over in my house, or like, you know, your neighbor's mowing their lawn, so you go out and mow your lawn. Like, it's just kind of like silly. We want to fit in with our tribe, right? So these like primal instincts that we have kind of hold on. So a messy zone where no one can see it might be a way to like start into this if you're nervous. So where to start? Don't be Amy is my lesson here. Do your research ahead of time, have a plan, and start small, right? I started big. I'm like, I have 600 square feet that I can plant a pollinator garden. I'm just gonna go for it. And then it was a little unwieldy, and now I've got to like walk it back a little bit, right? But if we're starting small and doing small steps, we're going to be in really good shape. And then books that I found helpful, in no particular order, Nature's Best Hope by Douglas Tallamay. We can get all of these at the library because that's where I've gotten all of mine. Prairie Up. These are all like very beautiful visual books as well, and they have awesome plans and things in them. This one I really love, Planting in a Post-Wild World. Also many beautiful pictures. Prairie Xeriscapes, so like low water landscapes. And then Practical Permaculture, also great. Karen gave me this one for my birthday. So thanks, Karen. So all wonderful books and resources, and then I'm going to talk really quick about some other resources. The NDSU Extension Service is an awesome place. They have so many resources online to go and look, or your local extension agent calling them up and helping get some resources is a great place. Social media, some accounts that I follow, this yard farmer is the lady that's down in Utah, but she talks a lot about like rainwater harvesting and native plantings and like how to do it well. Prairie Moon Nursery, and then this Native Habitat Project is a guy in Alabama, and he like goes out into prairies and talks about different things. The USDA Pollinator Garden Design Guide has an awesome guide that I wish I had 3 years ago, but I didn't. Master gardeners in your area are a great resource, and then your garden loving friends are also wonderful resources. One more resource that I want to mention that I haven't read yet, but I've heard really great things about, is a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's written by an indigenous woman, and she talks about like indigenous knowledge of landscapes and native plantings. So I've heard really high praise for this, but I haven't read it yet, so I didn't want to pretend like, you know, I knew it was really good. But I've heard good things. So thank you so much for coming. I appreciate your attention. Yeah.
Like my yard, I've got like maybe 4 inches of decent topsoil, and then it's clay underneath.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendation when dealing with something like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So you can't change the like composition of your soil, but you could try to change the texture. So like digging in things like compost and things might help aerate the soil. Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, that sounds like a great first step, what you just said.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
my whole lot is a couple inches of topsoil, and then
Yeah.
it's clay underneath it.
Well,
And my
it probably
neighbor
depends on,
waters incessantly, so it's real sticky and all
Yeah,
that
thick
stuff,
clay.
so.
it probably depends on what you're trying to do with it. Like if you want a lawn, right, like that topsoil is probably enough to sustain your, like if you have a bluegrass lawn. I'm guessing our natives would be good at like getting through that clay because they're built for it. So it really depends on what you're trying to use the space for. If you want like a vegetable garden, then probably
I've got a
digging it up.
vegetable garden that's all good. It's for the lawn or a flower garden or something like that.
Yeah. I would think about like, do you need to amend the soil? And then like, what's the use? And kind of starting there. Yeah, good question.
Raised bed.
Oh, yeah, great suggestion. Having a raised bed is what Tom said.
My garden is kind of raised up, but it's the rest of the lawn where the
Sure.
grass isn't doing well from all the clay and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah. Mhm. Good question. Great. Any other questions? No? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your attention.